Hello everyone and welcome to the show. Today we're going to take a look at a set-aside video produced by Justice of Peace Judge Joe Charter. He's with us today so we can ask a couple of questions after this video. Thank you for joining us today, Judge Charter.
My pleasure.
And we're just going to start with that video, and after the video we'll go ahead and make some comments.
Hello, my name is Judge Joe Charter. We're at the Jackson County Justice Court, and we're going to talk about setting aside records of arrest and conviction in Oregon. And our intent is not to give any specific legal advice, but to point you to resources and information online so that you can do this yourself. Looking at the size of the problem, 1 in 3 adults in America has a criminal record. That's 70 million Americans. 1 million youth have criminal records. And these records have collateral consequences for employment. Talk about collateral consequences as prohibiting or making it harder to get housing, employment, and certain benefits that may be available to you. A recent case in a federal court federal district court out east determined there are about 5,000 of these consequences for federal crimes. In Oregon, there are about 1,000. 70% of them relate to employment. And the point is that judges don't know or necessarily consider these collateral consequences when they sentence someone. They arise automatically from other statutes. A recent study by the University of Michigan found that setting aside a record of conviction can increase wages and decrease the propensity to commit future crimes, or what we call recidivism. They found that there was a 22% wage increase in 1 year, and that set-aside recipients were less than 4%. The recidivism rate was less than 4% within 5 years, and that's a very good rate. So on the next slide, we talk about the process in Oregon. The first thing to do, obviously, is to determine if you're eligible. We'll talk about that. There are some forms to prepare. You have to get fingerprinted. We'll talk about that. You deliver copies of these forms to the district attorney in the county where you were convicted, along with a cashier's check or money order for $80 that is made out to the Oregon State Police if there was a conviction. And then you filed the original forms with the circuit court and pay a filing fee. That fee is non-refundable if you are not eligible for the set-aside. The main thing to focus on is whether you're eligible. So what is eligible to be set aside? All misdemeanors, Class C, which is the lowest level of felony, and some B felonies. What's not eligible, most sex offenses or child or elder abuse convictions. And to be eligible, you have to have completed all of the requirements of your sentence, including probation, community service, all your fines paid. You can't set aside traffic violations, and you can't have any pending criminal charges. You must not have been convicted of any other crime within the last 10 years. We'll talk about that a little bit. So B felonies are limited in the sense that you have to wait 20 years from the end of the imprisonment or the conviction, whichever is later. And here's a caveat, a little twist in the road. So relatively minor municipal code violations within the 10 years, according to the statute, is an offense, so that would prohibit you from getting another offense set aside without that 10-year waiting period. So you could have a minor city code violation, like urinating in public, and that could prevent you from getting something else set aside because you have that city offense on your record within the last 10 years. Of course, if you were moving to set aside something like that, a city code violation, you'd file these forms in the city court where you were convicted. Now, some sex crimes can be set aside, but under very narrow circumstances, and you should consult with an attorney if you're trying to set aside that kind of conviction. Registered sex offenders are ineligible for set aside until their registration obligation is discharged. Juvenile court records can also be set aside after a juvenile turns 18. The set-aside is available after a 5-year waiting period if the person has no subsequent felony or Class A misdemeanor violations and no charges or investigations are currently pending. With juvenile convictions only, once juvenile convictions are set aside, there's another state statute in Oregon that makes it an unlawful employment practice for someone to discriminate against you based on juvenile records that have been set aside. The other law recently in Oregon is called Ban the Box. Basically, you can't be asked if you have criminal convictions before there's a job offer. You can be asked after a job offer, and there's a process for that, a little outside the scope of what we're talking about today. But basically, you have to wait 10 years. Well, you can't have another conviction in the past 10 years. You can't have another crime, which includes these municipal court violations within a 10-year period. Now we're going to talk about where and when to file. You have to file in the court where you were convicted, as we talked about. If the case has been acquitted or dismissed, you can file anytime. And if you've been arrested and the DA is still considering whether or not to charge, you have to wait 1 year from the date of arrest. Generally, you have to wait 3 years from the date of conviction. DUI diversion cases can't be set aside because that first diversion needs to be on your record because you only have one shot at DUI diversion. You have to have completed all of the terms of your sentence again, including any fines, community service, and have not been arrested again. Next slide is about where the forms go. Basically, copies of the forms go to the district attorney's office, a copy of the motion to set aside the conviction or arrest, a copy of the affidavit in support of that. We'll look at those in a minute. You need to be fingerprinted. You can get that done various places in Jackson County, Ashland, city of Ashland, the city of Medford, or the sheriff's office. There have different schedules, different days they're open to do that. You should probably call and schedule an appointment. I think it's $35 in Ashland, $40 in Medford, and $45 for the fingerprint card at the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. And again, you need that $80 check to the OSP. Only if there was a conviction. You don't need that if we're just setting aside an arrest record. So those are the copies of the form. We're going to talk about the forms. The originals, of course, go to the court. So an original of the motion to set aside, original of the affidavit, and the original of the order. The order doesn't need to go to the district attorney. Your filing fee is $265 for the motion to set aside a conviction. There's no filing fee to set aside an arrest record. We talk about where to find the forms online. It's a bit of a glitch on the internet. If you look at the Jackson County website, you won't find the expungement forms. If you look at the Oregon Judicial Department website, you won't find the expungement forms. But if you Google Jackson County Circuit Court expungement, which is another word for setting aside a conviction, You can find these forms. There are links. First, the instructions, the motion to set aside an arrest, motion and order to set aside an arrest, and motion and order to set aside a conviction. Next slide. So what happens if you've sent the copies to the DEAs and you've filed the originals in the court? What happens next? Well, the DA is going to send a copy of those forms to the victim, if there is one, because under Oregon law, victims have a right to be involved in all stages of a criminal conviction. The DA is going to send that $80 check and the fingerprint card to the Oregon State Police to verify your identity and to verify the records. The DA will then file an answer in the court, and if the DA objects, the court will set a hearing. If the DA doesn't object, the court will simply should sign the order based on the forms that you've filed. And if the DA does object, they're going to provide you a copy of the answer, which will set out the specific reasons for their objection, whether you qualify or don't qualify for a set-aside. And then on the next slide, we talk about what happens if there is a court hearing. The victim who has notice may appear, may give a statement. The court may take evidence as it deems proper. Basically, the court is going to consider whether you qualify for the set-aside of the record, and they're going to consider your circumstances and behavior from the conviction to the hearing date. So in other words, have you been complying with the law during that period? If the court grants the motion, the conviction or arrest is set aside and the record is sealed. So the record for a conviction would include the police reports related to the arrest. And if the record is sealed, is as if the crime never happened. So you can truthfully answer on any applications for employment or housing. You can answer that truthfully no to the question, have you ever been convicted? Now there's another issue we should talk about, and that is there are various websites who collect data on individuals, and if your picture and arrest record is on a website somewhere, is there a law relating to that? And the answer is yes. That's Oregon Revised Statute 646A.806, and that statute says that if you make a written request for removal of your photo and name from a website that publishes this kind of thing, and include documentation of the set-aside, which should be the signed order by the court, they must remove your name and photo, and they can't charge you a fee for doing that. The next thing I would talk about is some changes in the law with marijuana becoming decriminalized in recent years. The law changed in 2015, so many of crimes for possession, delivery, and manufacture of marijuana that were classified as felonies have been reduced to misdemeanors. So, for example, if it was previously classified as a Class B felony and was reduced to a misdemeanor, that's going to lower your waiting period for setting aside that kind of conviction from 20 years, Class B felony, to just 3 years. The Oregon State Police estimated that there would be about 78,000 marijuana-related convictions that would qualify for being set aside based on that lower waiting period or reclassification of those crimes. But so far in the last 3 years, only about 1,000 people have applied. So whether that's related to they have more complex criminal records or people just aren't bothering to do that, there's still a lot of potential for setting aside those former more serious marijuana convictions. Also in 2017, there's a shorter waiting period basically for someone who was under 21, under the age of 21 at the time of the conviction. It's just a 1-year waiting period for conduct related to marijuana possession, delivery, manufacture that occurred before April 21, 2017. So I go out to the VA as part of the Veterans Justice Outreach Program at Source in White City once a month. And many vets come in and they're trying to get records set aside. The problem is they may not be in Oregon. So they may be all over the country. 50 different states are going to have 50 different laws on setting aside convictions. How do we deal with that? Fortunately, there is a new Clean Slate clearinghouse where you can get information online about setting aside records in different states. This is the home page for the Clean Slate clearinghouse. It allows you to go to different states where there may be a conviction, get resources and how to set aside a conviction in those various states, to find a lawyer. In Oregon, most of the lawyers listed are going to be legal aid offices in counties around the state. Allows you to compare states. Go into you can click on any state if you want to find out what the laws are in Nebraska. It gives you an overview. There's a link for finding a lawyer in that state, and if there are court forums, there's a direct link to those court forums. So in Nebraska, here's an application for full pardon. Here's a criminal conviction set aside, self-help forms for adults and for a juvenile FAQ. So this is probably how it's going to be divided in every state. There's going to be a different process for juveniles and adults. You're going to need some basic instructions or FAQs. The other thing that is different in Oregon and that we haven't talked about is setting aside a conviction based, or setting aside a judgment, it's not a conviction, based on guilty except for insanity. That's a separate statutory procedure. So this is a very good resource online to be able to go to any 50 states, Alaska and Hawaii, Guam included, some territories, to find out what their laws are about setting aside convictions. The other thing I was going to do is just show the forms. There's a separate set of forms for setting aside an arrest and for a conviction. Basically, you fill out the date of the arrest, the arresting agency, the disposition. You sign it. You put your name and address, phone number as the person who prepared the form. The affidavit is important because it's a statement signed under oath. So you want to make sure all of these statements are true before you file this. Otherwise, you could be guilty of perjury. Basically, that you've served the fingerprints and the copy of the forms on the district attorney, that more than a year has elapsed since the date of an arrest, or 3 years from the date of conviction, and no prior convictions within the past 10 years, no pending charges. The last form in the arrest, set aside arrest, is the order. The order will be the judge saying to the Oregon State Police, modify your records to show no arrest, and the Oregon State Police will then send a request to the FBI for a return of fingerprints and arrest related to that arrest. The 3 forms are similar for setting aside a conviction, a motion, an affidavit, and an order. The main difference is there could be several charges you're trying to set aside if all of those convictions are more than 10 years old. So I hope that's helpful. And again, use the clearinghouse, Clean Slate clearinghouse to find lawyers. And also for Oregon, the Clean Slate will take you to forms, usually at the bottom here, court forms for various counties. So we have Deschutes, Polk County, Marion County. And in general, you could probably use the basic forms from any county, but each county might have slightly different forms. And that's all I have for you.
What a great instructional video. I'm sure there's a lot of people, and a lot of people that I know that just were in that hard place and didn't know how to get out of it. So thank you for making that for us. Can you tell me what motivated you to make this type of video?
Yes, as I mentioned in the video, I go out to the VA in White City once a month at the Veterans Justice Outreach. We had lots of vets coming in with convictions in other states, and so I always thought that I could do that job very well if I knew all 50 states' laws on setting aside convictions. Well, of course, I couldn't do that. I was there with my smartphone trying to find information for them. And then I think it was just last fall, the Clean Slate Clearinghouse gathered up all that information. So you can go to all 50 states and get very precise information on what to do in that state. So just a week or two ago, in May, I had a vet who had an issue in Wisconsin where we were able to focus in on the very minute detail of the statute. We found a statewide toll-free number to get assistance on set-asides. And so we narrowed it down to some very specific questions for him. And my motivation for doing this, obviously vets have difficulties when they're coming out of treatment, re-entering society to get a job or get housing if these convictions are following them around for a long time. So that's the idea, is to push reset, get a clean start, and the Clean Slate Clearinghouse allows us to do that. This video, we hope, is going to be useful in court settings around the state, in veterans service offices around the state, so just to educate vets what the process is, at least in Oregon and across the country.
Okay, thank you so much for the work that you do and taking the time to put this together and for being here. And I'd like to thank everybody at RVTV, Paisans, for supporting us, and we will see you the next time. Thank you.
Thank you.